Welcome to the Inspiring Heights podcast. I'm your host, Vanessa Kaiser, and I am so excited to be here with you today. Inspiring Heights exists to walk alongside you as we learn to create healthy rhythms, flourish in our faith, and be inspired where our feet are. We're honored that you're with us today. We can't wait. Let's get started. As we kick off the month of February, I thought it would be really fun to do a two-part series on relationships. Joining us today on the show is my very sweet friend, Heather. Heather and I have been friends since college. She is one of the most kind, loving, intentional people that I have known. And I am so excited for you to listen to her, share her wisdom with us on the topic of singleness. Thank you so much for being here doing this.
Of course, yeah.
Let's tell people how we know each other. Do you remember when we first met? I don't know if I remember how we met.
I don't either, to be honest with you. I'm going to say that it was during college, and I remember that you were living with Lacey at the time.
Yep.
But beyond that, I don't I feel bad because most people I remember, and I cannot pinpoint a day or anything like that of this is when we met.
I know, I can't remember. I do remember you went to Walmart with Lacey and I, right? For after Christmas shopping.
Yes, Christmas lights. Yes, that's my first big memory with you was looking at Christmas lights. And the interesting thing is it was specifically around if you got married at such and such height and you'd want these Christmas lights for that. Yes. That was actually brought up when we were at Walmart.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's funny. I want to talk about the season of singleness. Ben and I just got married a couple of years ago. And from the time I was 18 until the time Ben and I got married, I had a super deep longing to be married. But one of the things that I learned in that season was that I had these sort of myths that I had picked up about what married life was going to look like. And I think that some of those myths came from Hollywood, and some of those myths came from, in full transparency, the church, and how we talked about dating when we were younger and marriage, and then as we got older, how people approached me about when are you getting married, and acting like marriage was going to be the end all be all. And I watched friends get married and always loved celebrating with them. There was always that space of I really want to be married. I can't wait until God makes this happen for me. I remember friends saying to me things like, God's timing is perfect, and you just need to wait on God's timing. I remember wanting to punch them in the face when they said that. Then now I have legitimately found myself in that same conversation where I'm God's timing is so perfect. Yeah, I'm sure that I have friends that want to punch me in the face. When I think about the different seasons of life, the season of singleness, that season has these wonderful beauties about it. And it also has these longings and challenges for people who desire to be married. I just want to talk about it. I feel like you and I have had some really good conversations about this over the years. I'm just excited to have your perspective and wisdom on the subject. Okay, I just feel like I have to say this too. Marital status does not define you as a human, right? Or me as a human. So I feel like sometimes we talk about it like it does, and I want to make sure that people don't feel like that's what we're talking about right now. That's not my intention. Tell me about your season of life.
So I am working full-time. I graduated with an undergrad and a master's degree. So I'm now 32, living away from my hometown, just starting myself in a new church and a new community of people. Obviously, very much still single. So
tell me about what pieces of this season of life that you're in that you just find totally beautiful and lovely and encouraging.
Having my own time, not having other responsibilities tie me down. I can go to coffee with people. I can go out and meet people. I can kind of make my church decisions and all of that on my own, which is also scary but fun at the same time. Yeah. And then also just meeting new people. It's intimidating, but learning that, I can meet new people in the season of life, and whether they're married or single or whatnot. And so I think it's mainly just having my own time to do what I most enjoy doing.
Yeah. You are so intentional with your time and you love people so well. Yeah, like you're just so generous and giving. I love that about you.
Well, thank you. It's definitely not me. That's all Christ in me. But I will do what I can there.
What does it look like to, specifically on this, like this subject matter, what does it look like for your friends who are married to encourage you well without saying stupid things that are just like hurtful or annoying?
I wouldn't say it's not discussing the topic, but it's focusing on maybe other areas like how am I doing in the word? How am I doing making community? How am I doing in my involvement in the church? Like focusing on those positive things and not like always having that background expectation of, oh, it'll eventually be your turn.
Yeah.
And then also just including me, not necessarily making it about whether I'm single or married, but just including me on things.
Yeah. Oh,
Because
for
I
sure.
don't think that should necessarily determine my involvement in different like functions and things like that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So I moved to Idaho for like a very short amount of time and then I moved
Right.
back. And I think there was 2 years between the time I got back and the time that Ben and I got married. And in that 2 years, there were three of us gals that lived, or four, there were four of us, three others that lived here in Rapid that were really, really close friends. And two of them were married and had kids. And then two of us were single. And I mean, they were so generous with their time and just invited us in to like their family time
Right.
as if we were just part of their family, honestly. Like, I
Yeah.
felt like I had that with them. And that was such a sweet, sweet time. I've also been in situations in the past where it hasn't been quite that way or it hasn't felt so welcoming.
Right.
like you definitely feel like, okay, I am the odd one out here. This is weird.
Right.
And that's just an uncomfortable feeling.
Yeah.
I want to go back to when you were talking about some of the things that people say that are just annoying or like cringy, right? Around this
Mhm.
topic. What does it look like if you're chatting with a friend who is single? And I think the same question can be asked back and forth, like friends who are single versus friends who are married. And like what do you do? What do you say to friends who are married who are struggling in their marriage, right? And the answer is not like, well, at least you have a husband, right? There's this honoring both ways through the conversation.
Mhm.
But let's say that we're in the throes of that conversation. It's something is said like, I'm really struggling in this season. I really long to be married.
Mhm.
This is like, I just want to be totally, totally transparent because I just had this conversation with a girlfriend like not too long ago. And that was the gist of how the conversation was going. And I said,
Mhm.
I just can sincerely reflect on like my history and like the guys that I dated before I met Ben and like literally praise God that those things did not work
Right.
because like Ben is who God had for me. And so
Right.
when I'm in the middle of that conversation, I'm explaining that and I'm saying like, so when I say God's timing is good and he has like this plan for you, it has this whole different meaning for me now
Right.
than it did when I might have said that to someone else 5 years ago. Like it's just a whole different thing. And
Right.
so like there's just a root of sincerity that wasn't there before. And so
Right.
what does that look like in that conversation though? Because I still could reflect and go, I still hated when people said that though.
Yeah. And I'll be honest, I'm very careful to use that terminology because I know I struggle with it myself.
Sure.
But I think it's just being honest that we don't necessarily understand God's timing, but we trust in his timing. Knowing that I'm also struggling, may not be struggling at that exact moment in singleness, but I may not understand the season that God has me in all the time, but just like any other area of my life, I'm choosing to trust him in it. But yeah, again, the term timing, I feel like it's just really awkward to use in those situations because no one's timing looks the same.
Yeah.
And I feel like once you're past it and like you've had that thing happen that you were waiting to happen in God's timing, I feel like it's a lot easier to see. But when you're sitting in it, It's
Yeah.
not.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's really good. Yeah, and that's true about all things in
Right.
life. Yeah, for sure. What is your encouragement to someone who is waiting on God for something?
The first thing would be trust, even though that I know that trust is not merely mean you pray and then you sit there and you do nothing. You still live out the life that God has called you to in that moment. And also relying on what God says in scripture, on being that he's faithful, that what he is going to achieve is going to ultimately be for his good, to bring him glory. Also, when we're like waiting on something, I think it's important to not already have the answer figured out in our own head.
Hmm.
I think it's important to be like, this is what I desire to happen in this situation, but I'm also open to however God chooses to use that situation or however he chooses to answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really good. That's beautiful. I think that there's a lot of wisdom in that because, well, like, I'm a planner a little bit.
Right. Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. And so I feel like that's something God has really taught me in the last probably few years of just like releasing some of those expectations of like timing. Not even timing necessarily, timing to some extent, but even like sometimes I feel like when we feel out of control, we're like, well, I might not know when this is going to happen, but I'm going to tell you how it's going to happen
Right.
or what exactly is going to happen. Like with this job, with this house, with this guy, like whatever, whatever that it is. Like I definitely have found myself like really having to release some of that and just setting it down at the foot of the cross. And I feel like sometimes those feel like just words. Like, what does that mean? Practically speaking, like I
Right.
feel like we can ask that question and God can handle us asking that question. Yeah, I think releasing the need and the desire to be in control, knowing that God knows so much more than we could ever ask or think, right? And will do things beyond anything we could ever imagine.
Right.
So there was a group when I was in church shortly after I moved here that was like a singles group, like 30s and under or something.
Right.
And I think I went one time and they like met and then they like went out for supper at like 9 p.m. I'm like, y'all, it is past my bedtime. I can't do this. I can't hang. And I don't think I ever went back. But what's your perspective on that? Good, bad?
I think they're good, but I think it's also not going in there with unrealistic expectations. The new church that I got involved in has a young professionals group. I'd say it's anywhere under 35. And it's a good group to be in. It's a good group to meet new people, but also realizing that you're interacting with people from all walks of life. Actually, most of the people in that group are married, and I'm okay with that because I went in there just wanting to make friends. And
Yeah.
so I think people just have to be very careful to not think this is just going to be a coupling up situation or this is going to be how I'm going to meet my spouse because that may not be the case at all.
Yeah.
It's all dependent on what church you're in and who chooses to be involved because I think a lot of times married people are usually more comfortable getting involved in groups because they have someone already and so they don't feel like they have to meet everyone for the first time. They have someone that they already feel comfortable around.
I would agree with that. I think there's a lot of beauty, and I think no matter what it is, no matter like what marks the season, whether it's like, a college group or a hiking group or like, whatever it is, whatever marks the like commonality of the group, I think that they can be, really beautiful. I also think there's so much value, like we've already talked about, in like doing life together and being
Mixing groups,
careful,
yeah.
yeah, to not like segregate based on like age or interests or marital status, like
Right,
whether you have kids or not, like just, being cognizant of like doing life together as a group.
right.
What else am I like not asking?
I think it's just like any season of life, you have to be a little careful about what you say. So things like it'll happen in God's perfect timing or oh, you're too good of a person to not get married. Like I don't feel like people would say that in other scenarios, so I'm not necessarily sure why they say it around singleness because I can think of other scenarios that you wouldn't use that terminology because you know it would bother them.
Sure. Yep.
So I think it's just again, it's like the sermon, it's knowing your audience.
Along those same lines, just being really transparent about like I don't want to offend. I want to encourage. And so I want us to be able to be honest and open. So if I say something in an attempt to encourage you, like, know that my heart is like there to encourage you. But if it isn't encouraging, please tell me so that we can
Right,
like talk about it and move past it. I'll tell you, like, in full transparency, like, this episode is challenging because I don't want to say something that is, like, not encouraging. I don't want it to feel segregated. Like,
right,
I don't want to talk about singleness segregated from life. And so,
right,
because like I said, like, we are not our marital status, right? Like, that is
right.
not who we are. But I think that this topic, much like lots of things, I mean, infertility and job stuff,
Mhm.
careers, and how we're raising kids, and like, there's just all these things that I think can be feel uncomfortable at times to talk about. Yeah, like, let's talk about these hard things. But I think that if we don't talk about them, we can't encourage each other
Right,
in the ironing sharpening iron, I guess, so to speak.
right. And I definitely never want to come across anyone that I'm close with that I don't want to talk about it or that
Yeah.
it's not a safe subject to talk about. And I think sometimes it's just based on the relationship, how comfortable someone feels saying, "Hey, that really did not sit well," like how
Yeah.
that was said. And most of the time, that's not even how it's intended. It's just how I take it based on how I'm feeling at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even just the little things of someone like assuming that someone's in a relationship because single people hang out with single people, that's something people have to be careful about too, because that's that's not the message that those two people are trying to portray, but that just happens.
What is your perspective on being friends with a guy that you're not dating? I guess maybe my question is, what does it look like to set good boundaries if, like, you both know, hey, like, we're not pursuing a romantic relationship here? Not
Right.
so I'm not talking about like, hey, we're getting to know each other and we're kind of like
Right.
feeling out in this friendship way. I mean, like, hey, we know each other pretty well now and we know we've talked about it, or like we both are very clear in some way that like we're not pursuing a romantic relationship. What does it look like to set good boundaries with that, like, brother in Christ?
I've had to learn this over time, and it's the topics that you talk about, it's protecting your heart when you go into it. I've had to learn that things about like struggling with singleness, probably not going to immediately run to a guy that I'm just friends with, because that's not going in trying to protect my heart and leading him to where he may also hurt me in the long run by saying something that he didn't mean. And so knowing that there's some conversations that are best for like your girlfriends and like your sisters in Christ, and knowing that there's but I mean something as simple as talking about life, talking about work, what you're learning in the Bible, what you're doing in your free time. I think those are perfectly safe conversations to have with a guy. But I think I'm learning every day how to best protect my heart in those situations, and knowing that those relationships may have to change to some extent if that person were to be in a relationship, because you don't want to be having conversations that they should only be having with their girlfriend or spouse.
Yeah, I think that was always something that was really hard for me. You and I had some really like good deep conversations about that when we were in college, I
Right,
feel like, because I always really struggled with, like, basically, like, my philosophy for a very long time was, if we're not dating, we probably, it's fine if we're like friends, but I mean, at a very pretty good distance.
right,
And it's interesting because I can reflect on some friendships that I had in college where I think it happened. I think there was some that happened both ways, where like at some point in the friendship, like I was like much more interested in him than he was in me, and then
right.
I think vice versa. I think there's times where it happened the other way too, and then it's just challenging sometimes to navigate those. And so I love what you said about like protecting your heart and just kind of going like, just even consistently praying, like, okay, God, what does it look like to protect my heart in this situation? Yeah, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with like having a friendship with, a brother in Christ, but I think we want that line to not be fine. We want it to be pretty bold of like, this is a line that we're just not gonna cross, because otherwise we're crossing into dangerous territory.
Right.
Thank you for hanging in there with me and answering my
Oh,
dumb
of
questions.
course. Like this is, I feel like more supposed to be like a conversation between friends and something that should feel super formal.
Yes.
Because let's be honest, there's probably a semi-short list of people I'd even be willing to have like a conversation like this about, to be recorded, to be put on a podcast. But I'm
Yes.
comfortable here.
Thank you for being here. This is really good. We always ask our guests what's been inspiring them lately. So, Heather, what's been inspiring you?
I've had a lot of free time recently, and so I've been reading a lot. And so I've been reading just some fun books, but I've also been reading like some like Christian like living books about like emotionally mature like spirituality and those spending time in the Word and the Bible studies that I've been a part of. So just like the time that I've had to read, I kind of lost that time somehow, or I just didn't prioritize it. And so to just like spend that time and actually really just fill my mind with truth has been really encouraging to me lately.
Yeah, I love that. Any specific books that you would recommend to listeners?
I'm reading The Praying Life. I wish I had the author right now, but I do not. And I just started reading emotional spiritual intelligence, one of the two. And so those are both really good. I think there's a ton of good books out there. So I'm not going to try to like add to people's list because I know that there's a ton of them, and I've not read nearly enough to give great advice. But any like any books that you can find that help you grow in your walk with Christ, I think are important.
Yeah, for sure. I love that too. I am on my like annual reading of You're the Girl for the Job. Like it's sitting on my bedside table
Oh,
waiting for
yeah.
me to crack it open, and I need a little Jess Conley pick me up.
I read that once. I've not read it more than once, but I could see how that would be really good to read on a like annual basis.
Yeah, yeah. It's one of the ones that I'm like, oh, this is good, like rhythmically to like be reminded and encouraged in this way. So, well, thank you so much for being here, friend. This was super fun.
Of course, I loved it. I'll join your podcast anytime.
Thank you. Friends, thank you so much for listening in today. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. If you're so inclined, we would love for you to leave a review of the show wherever you listen to podcasts. This helps potential new listeners to get a feel for the show before they even hit play. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Inspiring Heights. If you haven't already, you can sign up for our newsletter, Inspiration from the Moment, by visiting our website, inspiringheights.org, and hovering over the Contact Us link. If you have friends that aren't yet subscribers, please share the podcast with them if you think it's something that would be helpful and inspiring to them. Okay, friends, until next time, take a deep breath and be inspired where your feet are. Bye for now.